You ever have bad dreams?
So tell me about it.
Well, I was in the bathroom, right? And as I was brushing my...
Emesis Blue is one of the most important SFM films I've seen. I'd say it's like the Lego movie of SFM films, which is a weird thing to say, but I expect it will definitely create a ripple in future SFM projects. It's a fun ride all round, and it explores psychological horror in a very interesting way. I mean, this comes from the same group of characters who I've associated with sandwiches and butt sniping, and yet somehow the film pushes each character, location, and object to make you reframe the context of what TF2 is. I will never look at respawning the same way again. But this is why Emesis Blue is important, because it shows that even with the limitations of using a world that has primarily been associated in a humorous context, one can really push the game to its limits and create some of the most horrific and compelling films imaginable. Emesis Blue shows that anyone can make a great film. What is Emesis Blue? To start with the most basic of summaries possible, we focus mostly on two characters, Fritz Ludwig, aka the medic, and Jane Doe, aka the soldier. Fritz is a doctor who is helping one of his clients, Scout, referred to as Jeremy, who, as a result of the respawn machine, a machine which has the ability to bring people back to life, is left permanently injured and plans on suing Blue. On Halloween night, Jeremy's mother is killed and he's later kidnapped. Fritz, after receiving photos of Jeremy's kidnapping, goes to Conagur's slaughterhouse. Meanwhile, Jane and Jacques, aka the Smoker, is tasked with finding the kidnapped Jules Archibald, an important figure who, behind the scenes, is actually fueling and maintaining the war for his own financial benefit. After a dangerous encounter that focuses on a mysterious suitcase, they then find evidence in Scout's home that Fritz may have been the murderer, and after inspecting his office are then led to Conagur's slaughterhouse, believing that Archibald may have been brought there. After that, characters continue fighting over the suitcase. Jeremy and many others are turned into horrific, unrecognizable monsters of themselves as the respawn machine continues having horrific effects on them. Watch the film, it's free, and after you're done appreciating the animation and storyline, come back to this video.
When they figured out how to bring us back, some of us would tell stories about what we saw on the other side. We saw old friends, family, mostly strangers.
To say Emesis Blue is about death is like saying Jurassic Park is about dinosaurs. A lot of people end up dying in this film, and by the end of it, we only have confirmation of Jane surviving the nightmare that ensues. On a more deeper level, Emesis Blue is about the fear of death and our inability to confront what's at the end. The beginning of the film highlights the negative effects of the respawn machine by showing some of the scarring results a few of the mercenaries have had to go through. A machine which has only a 10% compatibility rate, and even then a 1% chance of failure every time a person uses it. For any defect that occurs, one can expect deformities, mental afflictions, spontaneous combustion, and of course an extended waiting time that results in insanity. The sentence, "It's eternity in there," is mentioned a lot and is the first line technically spoken in the film. We see that the first victim of the respawn machine falls to his knees, having spent an extensive amount of time in death waiting to return. It highlights that there is a possibility that death itself is eternal. The idea of having to spend your time in an empty void of nothingness is one a lot of us will have to confront. We also see Fritz showing signs of religious belief. He does the sign of the cross when entering Conagur's slaughterhouse. He wears the cross after being gifted it in the church scene, and at the end of the film he even mentions God.
God help me.
We are never told if this is a coping mechanism for him or if he genuinely believes in God, but it's a contrast to the religious interpretations shown because at the end of the day we all die, regardless of what you believe in. Immortality becomes something of great interest. Tampering with death and perhaps living forever with deformities certainly isn't worth it, and we see how desperate some of the characters come to avoid death. Some are shot, set on fire, tortured, and yet they still return. Interestingly enough, Fritz and Jane are two opposing sides of the spectrum, with the soldier being the most naive and optimistic, and the medic being the most intelligent and neurotic. It's no wonder the soldier survives by the end because he's learned to confront many truths about what his purpose actually serves, even willing to commit suicide towards the end of the film if it means disrupting a pointless war, while characters who are desperate to have a few extra days of life become deformed and scarred beyond recognition, losing themselves in an attempt to gain immortality.
So tell me the facts. Who's the handoff? Who's your new employer?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Who kidnapped Archibald? Was it you? You know the price of betrayal, friend.
Another strong idea is that of the unreliable narrator. The medication seen in Emesis Blue is called, well, Emesis Blue. Weirdly enough, the only two characters who are confirmed to have not taken the medication are Fritz and Jane.
This is worse than I thought.
You know, it made me think a bunch of this stuff. Said I was seeing things.
And did the medication work?
I don't know. I never took any of it.
Some of the other interactions seem real enough, such as the interactions shared between characters, but the time loops, the constant images of a figure in a plague doctor outfit, and the hallucinations and dreams Fritz experiences are all indicators that the two of them might be seeing things that aren't really there. The movie loves to cross a fine line between what's real and what's not, and we're effectively left wondering whether Fritz and Jane not consuming the medication is affecting what they see. Who is the Undertaker/murderer? Towards the first part of the film, Scout is injured and his mother is murdered. Throughout the film, we see mentions of the letter M, possibly standing for medic. We see Fritz's obsession with the suitcase, and he is framed in several shots as being the potential perpetrator of the crime, with a bone saw even being at the scene, as well as the mentioning of an ambulance being driven by the murderer, seemingly all pointing to Fritz. Something else I should note is that Pyro is seen here about to attack Jeremy with an axe, yet to the right side of the room someone appears to be holding his mother's head as a way of distracting him. The question remains, who is holding his mother's head? Well, in another scene, Fritz ends up decapitating the Pyro, referred to as the Butcher, and as a way of luring the Sniper, referred to as the Hunter, he holds his head against the door, using the same technique seen in the living room. He's clearly shown to have issues with controlling emotions, and is willing to go far in collecting the suitcase, yet something else comes into play. The Undertaker is a figure wearing a plague doctor mask. Interestingly enough, he appears mostly with scenes involving Fritz, with the two of them interacting in several scenes. It's really difficult to tell whether the Undertaker is even real, as when everyone is fleeing the funeral, no one seems to pay attention to the Undertaker standing directly in the doorway. Although given that someone has just been shot in this scene, it's understandable that no one in the fleeing crowd would stop to care, and the film borders on a "is Fritz the good guy?" suspicion, as we generally see both his innocent and helpful side contrasted with his murderous and desperate side. Perhaps the scene where he views himself is when he begins to identify that there is a much darker side to his character that he isn't fully aware of. Another big question involves the suitcase. Given that so many characters die in trying to obtain it, many would be in the clear for asking, just what in the hell is so important about it? Why does it get mentioned in phone calls? Why do characters have such an obsession with it? And why does Fritz, by the end of the film, end up losing himself in trying to obtain it? During the reveal at the end, it's shown to just be a red orb with what appears to be tubes of flowing blood and corpses. It's a reveal that only leaves us with more questions. A common theory is that the suitcase is a compatible respawn machine. This of course makes us ask why the Conniger brothers did not end up being resurrected. Why does Fritz end up dying when he crashes the ambulance? Or is it a matter of time before he returns? Considering Fritz's focus with the cross and his obsession with the suitcase, it could be possible that he's very much afraid of death and knows what the suitcase is capable of after his first resurrection. What does Emesis Blue do? The video titled Emesis Diazepam acts as a sort of teaser trailer leading up to Emesis Blue. Emesis is the medical terminology for vomiting, and diazepam is used for a number of reasons, one of which involves reducing anxiety. This, however, is only shown at the twist, and prior to that, the bottle is simply called Valium Diazepam. A lot of theories have suggested that the bottle itself alters the DNA structure of the user when going through the respawn machine. This is actually very interesting, given that the individuals who are executed and used as experiments to be revived as part of the respawn machine are mercenaries, then it is not too far-fetched to assume that the majority of them were given the bottle as a prescription to assist them in reducing their anxiety. It should also be noted that it is confirmed, aside from Jane and Fritz, that Jeremy is a character to have not taken the bottle prior to the events of the story. It is only after that the medicine is ingested by Jeremy do we see him deformed beyond repair, as he is effectively liquefied by the respawn machine, a symptom that had not occurred prior to his possibly many uses during his employment with Blue. Many first-time viewers would be forgiven in not understanding what in God's name just happened by the end of the film, and it's here where I get into rewatchability and foreshadowing. One cannot properly experience Emesis Blue without rewatching it. During your second viewing, you begin seeing clever uses of foreshadowing you wouldn't have otherwise noticed. I've already mentioned a few of these hints throughout the film, such as Fritz most likely being the murderer, the pill bottle seemingly having a strong effect on the characters, etc. But there's also the spy getting burned in Jane's vision, Fritz's visions of the funeral, the time loops, the use of double meaning in the interrogation scenes.
You're gonna make it, Fritz.
I know.
The callback to a 10th mercenary.
Hold on a moment. What the hell is going on? He shot himself? Oh, bloody hell. Just throw him in the pit with the others. Excuse me, 9, Blue Talk.
The imagery of the briefcase being shown in another scene, I could go on forever. The thing about any great psychological horror film is that you'll always remain with questions, and when being given a second viewing, you're only left with more questions. But despite the confusion one may experience, I highly recommend watching it a second time, as doing so will give you an appreciation and understanding of all the subtleties and use of foreshadowing present in the film. At the very least, for a second viewing, I recommend introducing it to a friend. See if they can pick up on what's happening or what their own theories are. Technical stuff. Here is where I appreciate all the technical ability put into the film. Source filmmaker is pushed to its absolute limit. in Emesis Blue. Sure, there are times when characters stand out or special effects seem a little bit off, but shots like this and this and this are what love and dedication can result in. The lighting is also a key visual that expresses conflict, with a cool blue or neutral lighting being shown for times of calm. When the lighting really stands out is in times of conflict, when the red and blue clash into each other, showing the highlighted difference between characters and the violence going on around them. Black most often represents death, as it often appears in scenes containing the respawned mercenaries. The color was something I was surprised to see as being a really good choice, especially since red and blue isn't often associated with horror films, but for a TF2 film it works, and it works surprisingly well. Now there's a lot of great movement, sure, but there's also the subtleties and the lack of movement when the characters frown slightly, smile anxiously to hide their nervousness, or take brief pauses to think about and assess the situation. You really begin to understand how much care has been put in to make these characters appear as realistic as possible. Even if some of these scenes call back to TF2 gameplay, such as with the use of the rocket launcher, we really see the impact through the flames that spread and how Jane is launched and hurled by the explosion as debris crumbles around him. The locations are another amazing aspect of the film. One criticism I do have is the stone walls in Conniger's slaughterhouse. It stands out from the rest of the scenes in that it looks incredibly out of place from the bloody laboratory environment. Where the film becomes really interesting is through the set pieces within 2 Fort that really highlights its claustrophobia. There's this one amazing shot that utilizes the limitations of the area as Jane is held hostage by the butcher, and the spy, being on the lower side of the area, remains completely unseen, waiting anxiously to make his move. The city environments are also really pretty to look at, with all the washed out colors and bright lights, which at first glance tricks us into thinking this will be some sort of detective noir film. I also love the nod towards The Shining, another film which is known to have played with the audience, especially towards the end, by making them question the characters' experiences through death. Fritz was the most interesting protagonist for me. Not the most likable, given by the end of the film we see him lose himself, but he is definitely the most complex. As mentioned before, neither he nor Jane were seen ingesting the medicine, and it could be entirely possible that a lot of the parts they encounter are simply hallucinations. But to Fritz, there is a contrasting other side to him. A side that is willing to do absolutely everything he can to avoid death, even if it means killing people. By the end, we see a part of himself lost and destroyed. We can't even tell if he's in control at that point. The shot where he begs for his life in the scene with the Conniger brothers, and the shot where he confidently places a gun to his head, knowing full well he'll come back, shows us just how far he's come in controlling death. Jane Doe was by far the most likable character. As mentioned before, he's naive but optimistic, and in some instances incredibly resourceful. He becomes the main focus in the second act. The fact that he maintains his optimism in the end, even during the funeral scene, made me really root for him as a character. The use of the helmet to show his eyes during scenes of intensity and conflict, when we aren't at all used to always seeing them, is another good use of TF2's assets and character designs. We expect a character of his optimism to break and shatter like all the others, yet he's also the only character without any distinct physical deformity. Even Fritz himself is injured in some way through a scar caused by the butcher's burn. The reveal at the end when he is shown to have been personally killed by Archibald himself through execution makes you wonder what he and the other mercenaries might have done in their past. We also see him confront his existentialism when he sees clones of himself, as well as when he chooses to execute Plutarch. The Demo Man, or Cyclops, is another character who shows optimism. Sure, he ends up dying, but he doesn't return or come back to life. His undoing is his addiction, when he accidentally enters a cryogenics lab in an attempt to get a drink. His missing arm also implies that the respawn machine may have brought him back incorrectly. There was an almost bittersweet end to him given that he ends up doing a lot in saving Jane. I should now mention the antagonist of the film. The antagonists are characters you can certainly sympathize for, with a lot of them having gone through horrendous deformities throughout the film. Spy especially is an interesting antagonist and was the one I was most focused on. Through the beginning of the film, one is most likely to associate him as one of the protagonists, given the amount of attention and focus the camera gives him. Yet by the end, we see his true colors through his selfishness in killing other people, if it means getting a promotion or new gifts from Archibald. It's ironic then that when he asks for an assistant and a brand new car, it's the assistant who causes his car to be destroyed, and it's the assistant who leaves him to die. It's also implied that Archibald may have faked his kidnapping, although that's not entirely set in stone. Having been abandoned by his assistant and left horribly scarred in order to fuel a pointless war, we can understand why his sadism comes into play.
True. What is true to you? Or you who ran away? I am the only sane man here.
We also understand the double meaning since, as mentioned before, Fritz and Jane are both suspected of insanity. In the end, his greed becomes his downfall. As soon after his plan to replace Archibald is put into effect, he dies through Fritz's hands, and had he failed, would have died through Jane's hands. The butcher is the red herring we follow throughout the beginning of the film. It would not be uncommon, at least in my opinion, if audiences thought that he was the one leaving notes and luring Fritz and the others to Conniger's slaughterhouse. As an opening antagonist, he is used very well in building suspense. His reveal during Spy's capture is quite chilling, even able to intimidate the put-together detective into a sense of unease. The lighting reflects just how grisly and deformed his entire face is, to the point I actually felt a little bit unnerved. I found it interesting as well that after shooting at him, Spy effectively became the one with a face similar to the butcher and thus became the new primary antagonist of the film. I'll make a brief mention to Archibald since he is the catalyst for the film's events. Upon Archibald's kidnapping into Red territory, several blue mercenaries end up there in an attempt to save him. Given that Archibald plans to extend the war for as long as possible, and given that he is in control of a lot of the shady things, it could be possible that he himself hired the butcher in an attempt to get rid of Jeremy, who planned on suing Blue and revealing its secrets. Whether or not he knew the contents of the suitcase is unknown, and it's also unknown whether he planned his own kidnapping in an attempt to lay low after the most recent controversy, playing into the further mysteries that the film has. The Conniger brothers are portrayed so sadistically, and I love the use of the engineer's insanity along with the terrifying lack of eyes. In a weird sort of way, it plays into the character's slight insanity shown in the promotional trailer of the engineer. I personally would have liked to see them on screen for a bit longer, but for what it's worth, I think their time on screen was pretty well lived. This is a film I would have gladly paid money to see, and given that it's free on YouTube, I am really happy to see the film getting the recognition it deserves. Everyone involved clearly has a great understanding of visuals and cinematography that I found to be on a level similar to a lot of horror blockbusters, if not better. The voice acting is also pretty good. although at times slightly inconsistent. But most of the time they play into the characters pretty well. The dark humor itself did make me laugh several times.
Good gravel! I won! I outlived you, brother! I am the last man standing!
And I also noticed they were primarily used in action scenes so as to not take you away from the immersion of the slow build-up of horror. The film itself also had no jump scares. I think, don't quote me on that, relying mostly on the use of suspension. The scene of Jane running through the tunnels as a horrifying voice slowly builds up, coming closer and closer, made me lean at the edge of my seat. Big thumbs up to the sound team for their use of great sound effects and echoes to add further immersion to the film. Without them, I don't quite think that the horror would have been put into effect quite as well. Anyways, I gotta go now. But this video is sponsored by Patreon. Help keep me going if you want to see more videos like this and receive early access to videos, scripts, and ideas. I also have a free Discord server where you can continue receiving updates. But yeah, if there are any current films you want me to review, then leave a comment and I'll see you next time.